From 1966 to 1969, I was sports director at WLOS TV in Asheville, Channel 13. Every week during the season, New Asheville Speedway featured Richard Petty, David Pearson, Buddy Baker, and all the big names. But the big show in town every week of the year was wrestling in the auditorium. There were 3 stations in the area, Greenville, Spartanburg, and Asheville, and Greenville and Spartanburg wouldn't touch wrestling. But Channel 13 saw the potential for a large viewing audience, and wrestling was given as much or more time as any other sport. Johnny Weaver and George Becker were the Southern Tag Team Champions, and they were the fan favorites. Swede Hanson Rip Hawk and Sailor Art Thomas were not the favorites. There was a wrestling promoter there named Paul Winkhaus, one of the nicest, most polite men I have ever known in my life. Mr. Winkhaus would bring 2 or 3 wrestlers to the station. I always called him Mr. Winkhaus. I just respected him so much. He would always bring 2 or 3 wrestlers to the station each week for interviews, and the viewing audience was tremendous. No one had ever seen wrestlers treated with respect and allowed them to express their opinions and their feelings. Standing room was normal at the matches, but Mr. Winkhaus was a modern P.T. Barnum, and he was always coming up with something to get more people at the matches, even though each one was packed. Now, Joe Louis, a world heavyweight boxing champion, had been out of boxing for about 15 years, but he was still much loved and a household name, and Mr. Winkhaus brought him in as a referee. Joe Louis, my boyhood idol. When Joe Louis fought, the whole world listened. Daddy had a little True Tone radio from Western Auto, and we'd carry that thing around the room until the signal came in clear. And next day, all of us boys in the neighborhood would wrap towels around our hands, taking turns being Joe Louis as we boxed. In my teen years, Joe Louis had just become a legend, and when Mr. Winkhaus introduced him to the crowd that first night in Asheville, the standing ovation must have lasted 5 minutes. But like many professional athletes who came from nothing and made millions, having no knowledge of managing money, Joe lost it all and was dead broke, and Mr. Winkhaus arranged for him to be a referee so he would have some kind of an income. Like everyone else that night in Asheville, I got Joe's autograph. It's framed and is now one of my most prized possessions. Most every week, I took a cameraman to the wrestling matches, showing live action on television later that night at the 11 o'clock news. I've been told this was the first time that film clips of wrestling was ever shown on television. I left Channel 13 in 1969, which was a great mistake, and the next sports director had no interest in wrestling. Although the matches were still big, the wrestlers' television days were over.